Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the absolute most crucial concepts in modern civics, power sharing. But hey, we're not just going to sit here reading dry textbook definitions, right? Instead, we're going to explore this through a pretty fascinating real-world tale of two completely different national outcomes. So, let's jump right into this core mystery. Picture this. You've got two countries, both with incredibly complex demographics. We're talking different languages, totally distinct cultural groups. Yet they ended up on completely opposite paths. One of them figured out how to live in peace, while the other was literally torn apart by a civil war. So what actually made the difference? Well, as you're going to see, it all comes down to exactly how they chose to handle power. All right, let's start with the island nation of Sri Lanka. If you look at the breakdown here, it's pretty striking. The Sinhala-speaking community formed a massive 74% majority. Tamil speakers, on the other hand, made up about 18% of the population, and that's divided up into native Sri Lankan Tamils at 13% and Indian Tamils at 5%. Throw in a smaller Christian population of about 7%, and you've got a classic example of a heavily diverse society, but with one very clear dominant majority. Now, let's flip the script and look at Belgium, which perfectly illustrates the contrast here. Belgium is a European country that's similarly divided along linguistic lines. You've got a 59% Dutch-speaking majority, mostly in the Flemish region, and a 40% French-speaking minority in Wallonia. Oh, and a tiny 1% German-speaking community, just to keep things interesting. But here is the wild part. In their capital city of Brussels, the demographics entirely flip. French speakers suddenly become the 80% majority there. Talk about a giant puzzle. So, faced with all these complex demographics, Sri Lanka made a fateful choice right after gaining independence. Their newly elected government basically decided to push for outright Sinhala supremacy. Instead of accommodating all those diverse groups, they just locked down dominance for their 74% majority completely at the expense of everyone else. And that brings us to this absolutely crucial and honestly super dangerous concept: majoritarianism. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's the belief that the majority community gets to rule the country however they see fit, actively ignoring the needs, wishes, and rights of the minority. It's basically democracy acting as mob rule, and spoiler alert, it almost never ends well. You can literally trace the fallout step by step. In 1956, Sri Lanka passed an act making Sinhala the only official language, no Tamil at all. Then came the preferential policies, giving Sinhala applicants the fast track for university seats and government jobs. They even wrote it into the constitution that the state would protect Buddhism, the majority religion. Obviously, the Tamil population felt totally alienated, like their entire culture and future were being erased. This distrust spread like wildfire, and by the 1980s, Tamil organizations started demanding their own independent state, Tamil Eelam. And yeah, that tension plummeted straight into a devastating civil war that set the country back for decades. Now let's bounce back to Belgium, because they took a radically different approach to their own ethnic tensions. They recognized those deep cultural divides and actively chose to accommodate everyone. They realized pretty quickly that if the country was going to survive, they absolutely had to share the keys to the castle. To stop conflict before it started, Belgium went to some incredible lengths. I mean, they literally amended their constitution 4 separate times between 1970 and 1993 just to figure out a peaceful arrangement. They mandated an exact equal number of Dutch and French-speaking ministers in the central government, so no one side could just bulldoze the other. They also decentralized a ton of power, giving state governments real authority so they weren't just taking orders from the top. But the real game changer was this thing they invented called the community government. It's such a clever idea. It's a specific tier of government elected directly by the people of one language group, Dutch, French, or German, regardless of where they actually live in Belgium. This government gets exclusive control over cultural, educational, and language issues for their specific group. It completely diffuses that cultural friction that usually tears diverse nations apart. So what's the payoff for this huge, highly negotiated logistical headache? Total avoidance of civic strife. They totally dodged a civil war and built a remarkably stable, if kind of complex, democracy. It worked so well, actually, that when Europe was forming the EU, Brussels was given the massive honor of being chosen as its headquarters. Okay, let's move into our next section, why power sharing matters in theory and practice. Now, having seen the civil war in Sri Lanka versus the peace in Belgium, we kind of have to ask, why is power sharing so absolutely crucial? You can basically boil it down to two camps: prudential reasons and moral reasons. Prudential is all about pure survival. reducing conflict, preventing violence, ensuring stability. It avoids majority tyranny, which, by the way, doesn't just crush the minority, it usually ends up ruining the majority too. Then you have the moral reasons. This gets to the very spirit of democracy. People have a fundamental right to be consulted on how they're governed. Sharing power gives everyone a real, tangible stake in the whole system. Moving right along, let's look at the next section, forms of power sharing in modern democracies. So the theory makes sense, but how does this actually play out in the real world today? Power sharing isn't just one thing. It actually takes four primary, distinct forms across different levels of society. Let's break them down. First up, we've got the classic horizontal versus vertical split. Horizontal division shares power across the same level. So the legislature makes laws, the executive enforces them, and the judiciary interprets them. It's a brilliant system of checks and balances where no one gets unlimited control. Vertical division, though, layers power from the top down. That's your federal structure. Power goes from the central government down to the states and right down to your local town council. But hey, it's not just about the strict branches of government. Power is also shared among diverse social groups. Think reserved seats for minority groups, or that Belgian community government we talked about. And finally, you see it in the daily push and pull of political parties and pressure groups. Competition ensures power doesn't just sit in one place. If no party wins a majority, they have to form a coalition, literally forcing them to share. Even interest groups, like farmers or trade unions, get a piece of the pie by influencing decisions. All right, let's wrap this up with a quick final section. Test your civics knowledge. Now that we've mapped out the whole shebang, let's see how much you actually picked up. We're going to look back at that Sri Lanka timeline to see if you caught the nuances of how things went wrong. So check out this question. Which of the following was not one of the initial demands of the Sri Lankan Tamils? Was it A, recognizing Tamil as an official language, B, regional autonomy, C, equality of opportunity, or D, the creation of an independent Tamil Elam? Take a second. Spot the outlier? If you remember our timeline, option D, an independent Tamil Elam, was an extreme demand that only popped up much later in the 1980s. That was way after their first totally reasonable requests for language rights and equality were just repeatedly ignored. Ultimately, this whole explainer proves one massive point. Sharing power isn't just some textbook theory to memorize. It is literally the ultimate survival mechanism for any diverse society. Hoarding power, it always leads to fracture. Without power sharing, even a super powerful majority can accidentally ruin the whole nation. So I'll leave you with this to think about. Look around your own life, your workplace, your city. How do you see power being shared in your own community? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.